Can AI software truly bring an old video back to life? Well, in this video, we'll just have to see. So I have a few examples. I have some stand-up comedy by Dave Chappelle and Stephen Wright. I have some action movies, and I have some anime movies to test out, all with varying degrees of degradation to the quality of the footage. So I'm going to be using a piece of software called Video Enhanced AI by Topaz. You can download it yourself for free. I believe it's a 30-day free trial, and that's what I'm going to be using in this video. So it's a pretty simple interface. If we take a look here, we hover over any one of these options on the side here. It'll kind of give you a preview of what the effect is going to do and the different settings it's going to apply to the video. So they have the ones are specific for removing interlacing, which I'll get to in a little bit here, and some that are better for different kind of options you see here. So we can try to use some of these previews or try to use some of these presets, but I found I like having control over the videos I'm editing. So I tend to land on this Proteus 6 model here. So I click that and you won't see any changes applied just yet. However, you can use the auto button here and it's going to look at the frame that you have currently selected. And from that frame, it's going to do its best guesstimation of what you should apply to that video. So I can tell it's going to need a lot more revert compression here. So what that means is all these little squares, if I zoom in here, if I get real close to the face, you start seeing all these little blocky squares in the pixels. It's going to try its best to kind of smooth that out. And it really does differ on each video. Sometimes it'll have weird artifacting I've discovered. And again, this video isn't sponsored by anyone. I just want to do a quick review in case you're interested in restoring old footage or want to get into restoration in general. But this tends to do some weird things with the eyes sometimes, so keep in mind. So I'm going to press the preview button, and this may take a minute to load up the model. If I zoom out, we can kind of get a better sense of what it's doing here. And as you can see, it didn't really remove too much. You still see a whole lot of this little pixelation happening. So I'm going to exit out of there by pressing the close button there. And we're going to bring this revert compression up. I'm going to exaggerate it and just do all the way 100% and go back to the preview. So it did soften quite a bit of the pixelation here. It's having some weird effect in the hair though, and the eyes are starting to look a little wonky. So I like doing this true comparison because you go on their website and of course they're like, it does miracles. It restores videos to 4K quality. Like, not entirely every time. And it really depends on what the starting point is. So I'm going to play around with this anti-aliasing. And then playing around with the slider, I feel like it gives you a similar look to using sharpening. So kind of have to keep in mind when you're playing around with these things. So when you add recovery details, it'll also kind of give it a sharpened look. And the way to kind of balance that out is using what they call a dehalo. And it gives you a little tips when you hover over these question marks here. And it essentially says if your video has too much of the sharpening look, you can kind of bump this up. But the problem is if you go too high with this, it starts giving it like a little foggy glowed look. And that looks a little crazy to me right there. You're losing all kinds of details on this face. And yeah, so we wouldn't use it that far. And sharpening will only do so much. So it did get rid of some of, well, a lot of the pixelation we saw in the background, but then you're also kind of losing a lot of details in his face, which you don't want to do. So let's go a little further. So as we see here in the eyes, I can still make out what his eyes look like here. And here, it almost appears like he's wearing like makeup or something. It does something weird to the eyelid. I don't know what happened to the eye on the left side there. And there's a lot of really crazy artifacting happening here. So it can salvage video, but it can only do so much. Again, if your starting point is completely messed up, you're kind of stuck with what you have. What it also can do, again, it has all these different variations of examples it can show you here. So we can choose one of these other examples from their templates. Let's try this aliasing here. So these other options they have, a lot of them don't give you the option to kind of play around with any sliders. It's kind of just a preset. You plug it in and you test it out. So that one actually isn't too bad. The eye looks a little bit more like an eye now. Let's see, kind of skim a little further in the video. So it is removing some pixelation, not much, not as much as I'd like. So we can kind of keep going through the different, the examples I have. So the Artemis low quality version 12, let's try that out. So that one definitely smoothed out all the artifacting, but now gave it this weird look on the face. He almost looks like a lizard person or something. Like, I don't know what's happening. So to kind of, ideally, I'd like to balance that out by adding details back in, but because you're using this preset, you can't tinker with that. It's kind of, it is what it is, so to speak. You can add grain back into a video, perhaps, by toggling this on and off. So you can adjust the amount, you can adjust the grain size, and I'll just make some like larger grain. You probably wouldn't really use it like this, but it gives it this little grainy look if you're recorded like on film, for example. It gives it that film look, so you probably have it a lot more subtle than that, and the grain size would be smaller, like 0.4 or something. So it's not as bad. Anyway, so this is one example. I don't know if I'd start off with this. For this kind of level of restoration, I'd probably use a different plugin called, I think it's called Neat Video. It's a plugin you can use in either After Effects or Adobe Audition or Final Cut Pro. And it's just a filter that kind of specializes in removing different lines and artifacts in film and footage. I'd probably do that prior to processing it through here, and probably give you a better result. And then you can also do some color correction because the colors on his face looks a little crazy too. So that was the first example. So now I have a cartoon called Spirited Away, an animated movie, classic film. If you've never seen it before, check it out. You're missing out. So this one isn't the worst. I think it was from a old DVD or something, but you can see there's kind of loss in some of this little line work there. It's a little blurry. So I'm going to see what this can actually do. So they don't have a preset for like cartoons. So for this, I'd probably use the Artemis 6 setting here, so I can kind of fine tune it myself. I'm going to reset all this and press the auto button, and it's going to look at this frame and kind of analyze it and see what it can do. So it's recommending that I, boost up the compression or the revert compression option here, and it's recovering some details, not much. But I think I'm going to have to do some anti-aliasing just a little bit, or even the de-blur. See, this, you kind of have to play around to see which fits better for your footage. So the aliasing looks like those little blocky steps. I have a better example in another clip here from Dave Chappelle. So this would be your aliasing. This is actually really bad. And this, you see all these little really hard, sharp lines. So they have a preset actually in this that claims it can get rid of most of that. So DeInterlacing, sorry, maybe I misspoke and called it something different. So I'm going to preview that and see what it can actually do. So that actually did an amazing job of getting rid of that. I was kind of shocked when I first tried this out, but it did it really, really well. You can see those lines are no longer there. So it does do a really great job sometimes, depending on what you're trying to do, but you have to be very specific on what the goal is. So again, hovering over this kind of gives you an idea of what it specializes in, so that some are better for like portrait shots that are high quality, some are better for buildings and straight lines. As you saw here, that worked perfect for this example there. So I'm gonna try the other one that does de-interlacing. There's different views you can choose from, whether you want the single view, split view, side by side, or comparison view. I usually just use the single view, but you can do this comparison one, which can be helpful. Basically, it allows you to choose your original video, and then you can have 3 slots where you can change the different algorithm that's used to fix the film. This is pretty good to test out which one might work best for you. So for this third one, we'll try this. And then when you're ready to go, you just press preview. And it may take a minute to render because it's going to go through the 3 different models. It's loading each one on its, in its frame there. And then you can kind of compare what the differences are and how they're applying to this footage. So I can actually pause this here. So you can kind of go through frame by frame. So you can kind of compare which algorithm is doing what, and I don't know why this one's not quite as zoomed in as the others. But anyway. But yeah, you can A/B kind of compare which one is doing what. So the Artemis low quality, it's kind of rendering it slightly different than the Artemis Alias and More version 9, and so on and so forth. But it's a good way to kind of get a feel for how these things work and what they can do for your footage. So let's dive back into the anime. So go back into Spirited Away. I could do the same thing, but I'm just going to keep it to a single view. Zoom in. And from here, I'm going to boost the recovery details and preview. So already I'm seeing it smooth this out. So I'm going to pause this. So I can kind of go frame by frame. So it smoothed out this line quite a bit so you don't see these hard like pixels. It's adding a little bit more detail to the eye, sharpening some of these shadows here a little bit. And again, you can just kind of play around with the settings to see what works best for you. I can try this as a deblur instead of the aliasing. So we saw an example with like the aliasing and the DeInterlacing kind of looks like there. So let's bump this up. And if you hover over again, if you ever forget, so adjusting both anti-aliasing and deblurring, strength, relative, blah, 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 blah. So we'll play around with this. So I'm going to preview this now. So actually moving that slider to the right kind of sharpened up a lot of these lines, which isn't bad. I probably wouldn't do it as strongly. So I'll bring it down to maybe halfway, so like 40. And that's already a lot better to my eye. So I also noticed when playing around with this, if you're trying to restore footage that has like hair, it tends to give you a lot more detail with the hair if you're using the deblur setting here. You can, of course, play with the recovery details. If I go super exaggerated with 100%, again, it kind of looks like sharpening. So you may not want to use this particular one. So let me kind of go further along in this footage here. So right here, we can tell it looks crazy, right? It's like a little too much sharpening happening with that recovery detail option. The eyes are really noticeable where it does its thing here. And around the edges of this little bag on the bottom here, or whatever this is, it looks soft over here, and this is really sharp on the one that we restored. So I'll bring this down and probably dial that back a little bit too. There's not really a lot of noise in this footage, so I really don't need too much noise reduction because there's really no noise in there, and not too much dehaloing, but we can bump that up to see what it does. So that kind of gave me the that foggy kind of look, which it said you're supposed to use that if your lines are too strong, if you have like too much sharpening happening, but there's not really any of that going on with this example. So I'm going to dial that back down again, like 17. And already we've brought this video back to life quite a bit. The eyes still need a little work, so I might need to dial something back a little bit. So maybe not as much compression. And the recovery details, maybe 30. And the sharpening, dial that back to like 7, sure. Okay, so the eyes look a lot better. Our lines are a lot crisper. And it still looks a little soft here. Like the edges aren't as crisp as I'd like it to be. So we might be able to actually bump up the deblurring a little bit. Okay, it's getting there. But yeah, you can see where you have to kind of play around with the balance of this. But again, there's no settings specifically for anime. Now, the fun thing with AI, there is a lot of really fun tools out there. There's stuff on GitHub that are meant specifically to restore anime footage and can work really well. So if you have a chance and you want to kind of learn how to use that, I'd say give it a go. And it may take a second when you do choose a different section of your film because it does have to like reanalyze and do its thing there. But yeah, this is already quite a bit sharper and crisper, and I like the overall look, although the eyes still look a little crazy to me, so I'd probably have to dial some stuff back a little bit. But it does do its thing, although it doesn't always work 100%. And again, we saw the example with Dave Chappelle with the anti-aliasing. or DeInterlacing. I keep getting those two mixed up, sorry. So it takes a minute to load the model. But yeah, I got rid of those lines like wonderfully there. Like you really wouldn't notice that that was happening. Although it did bring in some interesting like noise to his face, like on the texture. It's not a deal breaker, but like, yeah, that just looks amazing to me. Like the microphone also gets a little warped. I don't know what happened there. It kind of was trying to guesstimate and did a really good job, but it doesn't do it 100% all the time. So for this, I'd probably process it once and probably run it through again to try to bring back some of these details by sharpening it. So I have a classic film here, Goodfellas. It's a classic mob movie if you're into that kind of type of film. So for this, I don't have anything specific in mind, so I'm going to choose my Proteus 6 option. I'm going to reset these settings and do the auto, what is this called? It's just called auto. It's going to look at the frame and kind of just guess what it needs to be done here. So there is noise in here, but that's because it's shot on film. You know, it's not digital. This is actual film footage, so it's going to have some noise. So I don't want to really get rid of too much of that. I'm going to leave that intact. However, I do want to kind of sharpen up some stuff. So let's go back to a different section here. I want to bring back some details. There's not a lot of compression happening. It just looks a little soft. So let's bring the deblur in here. Try like 20%. Zoom out. You do have to kind of be cautious when you're using some of that deblur and the compression, because it has this weird thing where it kind of warps the face, and it's already kind of happening with some of these people in the background here. It's trying to guess at like what is missing and fill in those blanks here, but like these faces are getting a little wonky. I can see his mustache is supposed to be there, but it elongated it. His eyes, you can't really make out there, so it's kind of trying to guesstimate where that's supposed to be. Her face, it's making it really dark and almost looks cartoonish. So you do have to kind of be mindful of that. So let's try one of these other preset models and see what it can do. So I'm going to choose Artemis High Quality 11. And again, from these other ones, you don't have control over what it's all doing. You just kind of have to hope that it does its thing. And sometimes it does it really well. So that one didn't really do what I wanted it to do. Let's try medium. Just going to go through the different models here. And that added like an overall sharpness, but it's giving me like this weird, I don't know, something about the edges of this looks a little off to me now. So I'll pick a different clip. So let's do this de-haloing option here. So again, loading the new model takes a minute sometimes. So let's pause this so we can kind of go through the frames here. So it definitely brought her into focus a lot more. But something's happening with his face here. I can't quite tell you what's happening here. I can still make out his nose here, and it's kind of lost in this frame here. I'm just kind of A-B comparing in the background. What else we have going on here? And again, with the eyes, sometimes we get this weird artifacting going on. It really tries to exaggerate the whites in the eyes. So that one looks a little funny to me. Go ahead and keep going through the different frames here. So that one's not bad. It could be better. So let's keep moving. And again, not sponsored by this company. Just, it's a really helpful tool sometimes, and I wanted to give different examples of how it can be used and some of the effects it can actually do. And again, it kind of looks like the sharpness level is boosted on this particular model. It looks okay. But another cool thing you can do with this is adjust the sizing. So they have some that you can choose where it doesn't modify the size. It just focuses on the denoising and getting rid of blockiness. And we're going to use the Proteus 6 model, or is it the Artemis? What's it called? Where did you go? There you go, Proteus 6. So then I'm going to kind of adjust some of the sharpness again, and then preview. So that actually isn't too bad to me. But what you can do is adjust the sizing. So right here, I can double the size. I can, make it 400 times larger. Like it's going to be enormous. So like You just want to make sure you have a lot of space on your computer too. But you can also see the white framing here. So if I'm adjusting the size here, it'll kind of tell me what the bordering is going to be here. And then you have an option that says crop to fill, meaning it will crop out anything beyond those borders. Without that toggled on, it's going to give you, without this toggled on, it's going to give you like a black border around whatever's not within that frame. You can also customize your settings here too. You can go to, I don't know, let's make this 5,000 for whatever reason. And if I rendered this out, it would only render whatever's within this frame. So you want to keep that in mind there. You can add, it's telling me right here what the size is going to be. If I rendered it at this size, it's going to be enormous. So, and then you have a constant rate factor. So default quality settings from 4264 codec, lower values, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So you just play around with the little quality slider if you like. And then you have an option to get rid of the audio. I don't know why you would want to do that, but you can. One of the other fun things to do also with this is you can slow things down, but I'm not going to get to that just yet. I have one more example. Actually, two more examples here. So I have another anime movie just to kind of see. This is a Dragon Ball Z movie. And I want to see what it can actually do. So I'm going to preview this. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. So we're going to pause this here. So it is smoothing this out quite a bit, getting rid of some of this little rough little edge here. But you can probably even go a little further. I'm going to double that compression and the recovery. And then also, it's not really a lot of aliasing happening there, but I can bring that up and pause it again. So that got rid of it a lot more too. So you can definitely restore some anime movies if you wanted to. You can also save some custom settings if you're happy with settings you've made by just going under custom and pressing save new, and I'll give you the option to save whatever your settings are as a preset. But they have one that you can make any footage into super slow-mo, 60 frames per second, 400 times slow-mo. Keep in mind, it's going to take really, really long. So even something as small as like 6 to 12 seconds can take hours to render. One, depending on your computer's processing power, and two, just how the AI functions. So just keep that in mind when you are using that option. Back to my opening question, like, can AI salvage old footage? Yes and no. Really depends on the source that you're starting off with. Like if the quality is really bad to begin with, it's not going to magically bring it back to life. But if your quality is pretty decent, it can enhance it quite a bit. So I would say this would be a pretty good investment if you're trying to get into, restoring stuff. As a hobby, it could be on the pricey side. So also keep that in mind. Anyway, hopefully this was an entertaining video. Be sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more from TheProtoArt. And if you're looking for audio restoration and post-production editing, check out my website, goldcoastaudio.com, where I offer all those services and more. I will talk to you all soon, so have a wonderful day.